Hello and welcome to Let's Talk and Learn. I'm Mary Joycey, and today we are diving into a deeply human experience loneliness. We have all felt it at some point, in some sense, in some degree, where we feel a feeling of disconnection, a feeling of cut off, not only from others but from ourselves. And this feeling is so intense and so strong that if we dwell in this feeling, are so submersed and so in one with it that we feel that, oh, this is our comfort zone and we don't want to get out of it. It's a universal emotion, this feeling of loneliness. Yet we often struggle to talk about it. So today, in some form, we are going to unpack it just to see how real is this loneliness. Is it just a fleeting emotion, or does it run deeper with lasting effects on our lives and well being? So, we'll explore this question from multiple angles, from the lens of psychology, from the reflections of philosophy, and even from the insights of spirituality. So, by the end of this episode, I hope that you'll walk away with a clearer understanding of loneliness and a practical tool that you can navigate and use when you feel this feeling, immersing in this feeling, and how to get out of it. So let's start by asking ourselves, why does loneliness feel so heavy? To understand this, we have to look at what's happening in our brains and bodies. Loneliness isn't just about feeling sad or isolated, it's a physical experience. Picture Sarah, a young professional who's just moved to a new city. She's doing well at work, keeping herself busy. But when it comes that she has to finish work and go walk all the way home, open that door, switch on the light, and sit inside, there's nobody around. But there is when she starts feeling this feeling of loneliness. And this heaviness often takes a toll when you have to experience this every day in your life because nobody can shake this feeling for you. So she scrolls through social media, seeing everyone seemingly having a very happy and fun life, and then she starts to wonder, why do I feel so alone? Now, this feeling that Sarah is grappling with isn't just emotional, it's physical. When we feel lonely, our brain processes it in a way that it's very similar to a physical pain. Because studies have shown that the brain's dorsal cortex, the area which lights up when we experience physical pain, also activates when we feel isolated. So, Sarah's loneliness isn't just in her head, it's a very real experience, similar to as stabbing pain in your toe or touching something hot. So, over time, loneliness can take a toll on each and every person's health if we don't know how to get out of this lonely feeling. So, prolonged feeling of isolation have been linked to weakened immune systems, increased inflammation, and even a higher risk of heart diseases. Imagine that loneliness can be as harmful as smoking or obesity. That's why it's so important not to dismiss it as something trivial or just as an emotion, but to evaluate and analyze this feeling of loneliness and find ways to overcome this feeling. Because we know that loneliness is real and it affects our biology in profound ways. But why, in today's hyper connected world, do we still feel so alone? You can be surrounded by people, you can have thousands of friends on social media, and you still are crippled with this deep sense of disconnection. That's what makes loneliness so tricky. Because it's not about the number of people in your life, but the depth of your connection to them. You could, there are ways of finding out how you could be connected to somebody, but still not be connected physically or by social media and still have that connection with the person. For example, sibling connection or parents connection. You might not talk to your parent for months and months apart, but still you will feel that connection with this person. Because it's not the quantity, but it's the quality of that feeling that stays with you. Those memories makes them feel so real and makes that connection and that bond real. Well, there is a factor that it is a blood relative, or there's a blood connection, or there's a genetic connection there. So that also strengthens that feeling. Now, let me introduce few examples. Let's say a person named Tom. He's in his 40, he's successful at work, has friends. He sees all these friends or colleagues and meets them every day in gym. And he has chats with them throughout the day. But every evening when he walks into his home, he might be hit by a wave of emptiness. And he wonders, why do I feel so disconnected, even though I have people around me? So, to answer that, we need to think about our evolutionary history. Our ancestors often had these close knit groups to survive. So, being alone meant vulnerability, predators' risk, starvation, or other dangers. And that's why when Tom feels isolated, his brain reacts as if he's in a survival mode. He might become more anxious or overly sensitive to social cues, interpreting small things like a delayed text message as a sign that people don't care about me. So, the more disconnected we feel, the harder it becomes to reach out. We start withdrawing, and in doing so, we push away the very connections that we need to cling on to. And it's almost like our brain is playing a cruel trick on us. What once kept us safe is now working against us in our modern lives. But loneliness isn't just a matter of biology or evolution, it runs even deeper. So, listeners, like touching the core of what it means to be human is where loneliness brings us to. Think about Claire, a successful writer in her 30s. From the outside, her life looks perfect. She has a thriving career, a group of friends, yet there is this nagging feeling of loneliness that just seeps in, that she can't quite explain or shake off. And she wonders, does anyone really understand me? Do they know who I am beneath the surface? Now, this feeling is totally different to what we call imposter syndrome. Because this feeling that Claire is feeling is that true connectedness. Do they know who I am beneath the surface? This is where philosophy comes in because Claire's experience isn't about missing someone's company, it's about something deeper, something existential. Philosophers like Kierkegaard and John Paul talked about this feeling in a more philosophical sense, which is called existential loneliness. And it's the realization that at the end of the day, we are fundamentally alone in our inner experience. No one else can fully understand what it's like to be us, to feel what we feel, to carry our fears, our dreams, our hopes, our existence. But here is the twist: existential loneliness isn't necessarily a bad thing. For some people, like Claire, this realization can become a source of strength. It pushes people to search for that deeper meaning in life, to attain what I call self actualization, according to Maslow, to find that one purpose in life beyond the surface. And Claire's loneliness might drive her to discover new passions, deeper connections, or even a spiritual awakening. It's often in these moments of isolation that we grow the most and powerful. And it's this is where creativity, faith, and even love can take root. In fact, many spiritual traditions see loneliness not as a void but as a signal or as a path. We can even call this as an experience of enlightenment, a longing for a connection not just with other people or other person, but with something that is more greater there. For example, Michael, after losing his wife, he was consumed by grief and loneliness. And he tried to fill the void by keeping himself busy, but nothing seemed to help. Eventually, he turned to faith, spending more time in prayer and meditating. So, over time, Michael began to see this loneliness as a bridge, a way to connect with the divine. In Christian theology, loneliness is often viewed as souls longing for something divine or God, godly experience. So is in other religions like Buddhism, where it is considered as an illusion. The teachings on interdependence remind us that we are all connected, even when we can't see it. So, this feeling of connection is what is the root, is what seeps into this whole variable called loneliness. So, for Michael, this realization brought peace to him because he's feeling connected with the divinity. And he found that even though he was physically alone, he was never truly isolated. Now, let's look at how loneliness can fuel addictive habits. Because when we feel emotionally disconnected, many of us start looking for things or we call quick fixes, which is like a sense of physical connection or something there and I'm connected to it. And we try to numb the discomfort through substances or behaviors that temporarily fill this void. Imagine being in a situation where the loneliness is unbearable and a person reach out for these or binges on things that are called escape mechanisms. And these addictive behaviors might provide short term relief, but in true reality, you are not connected to them because there is a sense, there is a time or a moment in space when this feeling of addiction or this wears off in your system. And then again, you are on the same space of time where you're feeling this isolation. So, the more we try to numb the pain, the more we pull away from the very things that could help us. And this cycle is something which is very prominent. It's actually beautifully depicted in a movie called Children's Act. And this film explores loneliness within relationships, particularly through the characters of Fiona, a judge who is so deeply absorbed in her work that she neglects her emotional connection with her partner. And the partner starts feeling emotionally abandoned, even though they share the same space, even though they say that they love each other, but still they don't feel that connection within themselves. And despite being married for 20 years, this loneliness grows in the other partner's life, and the partner starts voicing this that he is feeling lonely and he starts to crave connection outside. Now, here is where the sense of ownership also comes into place because this character, which is Jack, believes that he's entitled to Fiona's emotional attention because of their shared history. And this entitlement creates a dangerous dynamic because he starts comfort outside the marriage and believing that an affair will solve his loneliness. And very honestly, he does say to his partner that he's going to have an affair. But what he doesn't realize is that this sense of ownership is eroding the meaning of their relationship. So when we feel that someone owns our emotional fulfillment, we lose sight of genuine connection and intimacy. Instead of healing loneliness, this mindset can destroy the very relationship we rely on for support. So sometimes the feeling of connection or connectedness, as we call, doesn't have to be concrete, doesn't have to be physically present there. Like I said, you could be very connected to a substance, but there could be a partner or you could be in a relationship where there is no physical intimacy, but still there is a connection, there is a connectedness within that relationship. Just like, as I say in the movie Children's Act, what Jack's affair or addiction gives us an illusion of connection, it leaves him more isolated than before. Because whenever we have seen that substances like gambling or even binge watching television are coping mechanisms and they provide a fleeting sense of relief, but they fail to address the root cause of our loneliness. The dopamine hit we get from these addictive behaviors tricks us into believing we are filling the void, but the emptiness always returns. It's a revolving door mechanism, and often it's deeper than it was before. So, how do we combat this? One key is the emotional regulation. Learning to manage our emotion, be in control of our emotion in a healthy way, instead of turning to quick fixes. Emotional regulation involves recognizing when we are feeling lonely and allowing ourselves to feel those emotions without immediately trying to numb them. It's always to go through, it's always healthy to go through that experience. That's when the realization or self realization comes in. It's about sitting with the discomfort and understanding what our loneliness is trying to tell us. I know there are various sources out or strategies out there to overcome this feeling of loneliness, like practicing mindfulness, journaling, or even talking openly about your feeling with someone that we trust can help us to navigate loneliness without falling into the trap of addiction or unhealthy coping mechanisms. But emotional regulation is about building resilience within ourselves, learning to be okay with moments of solitude or boredom, and finding ways to fill the void with meaningful activities, whether that's through creative expression, building stronger relationship, or seeking professional support when necessary. Because loneliness, listeners, is a very deeply complex emotion. And it's fascinating to see that how psychology and behavioral scientists have explored it. I want to give you an example from Sigmund Freud and B.F. Skinner's experiments. Freud, who is known as the father of psychoanalysis, believed that much of human behavior was driven by this unconscious desire and unresolved conflicts. He always said that loneliness often stems from unmet emotional needs or something that's there in childhood trauma or in childhood attachments or lack of affection or unresolved issues. And in his views, someone experiencing chronic loneliness may have unresolved conflicts related to feelings of abandonment stemming from that early relationships with their caregivers. Like in one of my earlier podcasts, I said that if the child didn't feel secure in their bond with their parents, they might unconsciously seek validation or connection from others as they grow adult, but still feel alone when these connections fail to meet deep emotional needs. That's what we call unmet emotional needs. So imagine someone like Claire, a successful writer that we discussed earlier. Freud might interpret Claire's existential loneliness as a manifestation of deeper unconscious conflicts about belonging or loving that she carried from her childhood days. So her success and social circle mask the unresolved issues that keep her feeling emotionally disconnected. But on the other hand, she has that resilience, that emotional regulation to make this negative experience into something positive, use it as her strength. On the other hand, B.F. Skinner, a behavioral psychologist, would approach loneliness from a different angle. Now, Skinner would say that behavior is shaped by reinforcement and conditioning. According to Skinner, loneliness might develop from an attempt to connect with others, are met with negative reinforcements, or we called negative mechanisms. For example, if a person like Tom, the man in his 40s, he's surrounded by people but still feels lonely and is repeatedly trying to socialize but is met with rejection or indifference, he may learn to avoid reaching out. So, over time, the brain associates social interactions with pain or discomfort, creating a behavioral pattern of withdrawal and isolation. So, Skinner conducted a lot of experiments that showed how both positive and negative reinforcements could shape behavior. For example, in animals, mostly his studies are on pigeons or on rats. He learned to avoid situations where they experienced negative stimuli, much like how a person might withdraw from social interaction to avoid further emotional pain. In this sense, loneliness can become a conditioned response, a cycle that reinforces itself, making it hard to break free. For example, if you poke a rat or a pigeon and time you bring a stick near that pigeon or a rat, they will have a negative response to it. So these perspectives highlight different layers of loneliness. Freud shows that how unresolved internal conflicts might drive it, while Skinner reveals how our environment and learned behaviors can reinforce feelings of isolation. So when we meet with people who would have in our interactions with them, we would have negative experiences. We would eventually, in our adult life, try not to be in that similar situations with them. So ultimately, breaking free from loneliness requires both an understanding of our deeper emotional needs and a willingness to change our behavior. So, by recognizing the patterns we have developed, so we have to sit and see or reflect what patterns in life have we developed that is bringing us to this feeling of loneliness. Are they stemmed from childhood or learned avoidance behavior over time? And then we can begin to reconnect with others in a more healthier or more fulfilling ways. And we start developing strategies. So let's do a little bit of exercise to see how we can regulate our emotions and manage feeling of loneliness. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of technique we call anchoring. And this technique will allow you to associate a positive emotional state with a simple physical action, something you can use to trigger that positive feeling whenever you need. So I want you to close your eyes if you're comfortable to do so and think about a moment when you felt truly connected with a joyful or a peaceful experience. Maybe it was a time you were with your family or friends, or perhaps a quiet moment in nature enjoying your own company. Close your eyes and really immerse yourself in that memory. Now, what do you feel? What did you see or hear? Let that positive emotion build up inside you. Once you're fully immersed in that memory, create a physical anchor. A simple gesture like squeezing your thumb and forefinger together or pressing your hand to your heart. Now, whenever you feel overwhelmed by loneliness, use this physical gesture to trigger that positive feeling. For example, you have a beautiful memory of sitting on a beach surrounded by the lovely blue waves, the cold waves touching your feet and then drifting back, coming back to you, touching your feet and going back. And this touch is bringing in you immense feeling of peace on the very hot summer's day. Anchor this feeling. Squeeze your thumb and forefinger together. And this is your emotional state. So now whenever you feel lonely, squeeze your thumb together and think about this feeling that you had experienced in one of a lovely moment, a positive moment. Now, loneliness is a deeply human experience, but it doesn't have to define us, listeners. Whether it's driven by biology or ancient instincts, addictive habits, or a deeper existential questioning, loneliness can be a signal, a reminder that we are all searching for the connection in different ways. So it is this connection that we have to bring into our lives. As we go to doctors for medication for all the problems that we have, if we think that loneliness is a problem that we are facing, then we have to build a connection to overcome that loneliness. So listeners, before we wrap up, I'd like to leave you with a beautiful thought. a reminder that loneliness is part of our shared human experience, but it doesn't need to define us. There is this poem by Hafiz, a Sufi poet, that I think beautifully captures the essence of finding connection even in our deepest moments of solitude. Where Hafiz says, I wish I could show you when you're lonely or in darkness, the astonishing light of your own being. So, loneliness can be seen as a call to reconnect, a sign, not just with others, but with ourselves, and the light we carry within. Loneliness is a deep human experience. If today's conversation resonated with you, or if you know someone who might need to hear it, I encourage you to share this episode. The more we talk about loneliness, the more we break this taboo called loneliness, and the more we break the walls that loneliness creates, the more we can create that feeling of connectedness. Thank you for joining me today on Let's Talk and Learn. Remember, connection is always within our reach. Just put your hand out, reach out, and get connected. Until next time, take care of yourselves, make true connections with each other. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope that you have a fantastic week ahead.